September 25th, 1066. A 51-year-old man stands on English soil, 7,000 warriors at his back. He has survived things that would break most men. Wounded at 15, exiled at 16. He walked across Russia, served Byzantine emperors, fought in 18 major battles across 3 continents. He accumulated more wealth than most European kings, then gave it all away to fund this moment. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking, the most experienced military commander in the medieval world. In 6 hours, he will be dead. His army will be destroyed, and the Viking Age, 3 centuries of Norse dominance, will end on a bridge in northern England. What went wrong? To understand how the greatest Viking warrior lost everything in a single afternoon, and we need to trace the path that brought him to that bridge, and the fatal decisions made along the way. Harald Sigurdsson earned his nickname Hardrada, meaning hard ruler, through a life that reads like fiction. At 15, he fought in the Battle of Stamford alongside his half-brother, King Olaf II. They lost. Olaf died. Harold, badly wounded, escaped into the wilderness and eventually made his way to Kievan Rus. For the next 15 years, he built a legend. He served in the Varangian Guard, the elite Viking bodyguard unit of Byzantine emperors. He fought in Sicily, Bulgaria, the Holy Land. Byzantine sources describe him as towering, nearly 7 feet tall, and violent in everything. By 1046, he returned to Scandinavia with enough gold to buy a kingdom. He didn't need to buy one. He took Norway by force, and ruling for 20 years with an iron grip. But Norway wasn't enough. In January 1066, Edward the Confessor, King of England, died without an heir. 3 men claimed his throne: Harold Godwinson, the most powerful English earl; William, Duke of Normandy, who said Edward promised him the crown; and Harald Hardrada, who argued that a previous agreement gave Norway rights to England. Harold saw opportunity. England was the richest prize in Northern Europe, wealthy, fertile, weakly defended. And Harold had something his rivals lacked: 3 decades of unbroken military success. In the summer of 1066, he assembled the largest Viking invasion fleet in over 50 years. 300 ships, between 7,000 and 9,000 warriors, veterans from campaigns across Europe. This wasn't a raid. This was conquest. What Harold didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his greatest strength would become his fatal weakness. He was so experienced, so successful, that he had forgotten something essential about war. Sometimes, the enemy surprises you. Harold's fleet landed in northern England in early September, joined by a crucial ally, Tostig Godwinson, the exiled brother of the English king. Tostig knew the land, the politics, the weaknesses. Together, they had local intelligence and overwhelming force. The first engagement proved Harold's reputation was earned. On September 20th, at the Battle of Fulford, Harold's army faced the combined forces of the northern English earls, Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria. The Vikings crushed them. Contemporary sources estimate the English lost over 1,000 men. The earls fled. York, the second largest city in England, surrendered. Harold was now master of northern England. He had achieved in days what others might take months to accomplish. And here, he made his first critical mistake. Instead of pressing south immediately, while the English were reeling and Harold Godwinson was 200 miles away in London, Harold paused. He demanded hostages from York. He negotiated. He rested his army. The calculation seemed reasonable. His men had fought a battle. They needed food, supplies. The hostages would ensure York's loyalty, and surely the English king couldn't respond quickly enough to matter. This assumption was catastrophically wrong. When Harold Godwinson learned of the invasion, he did something unprecedented. He force-marched his entire army, approximately 8,000 to 10,000 men, from London to Yorkshire in just 4 days. That's roughly 185 miles, averaging over 40 miles per day. Medieval armies typically covered 12 to 15 miles daily. Harold's march was the fastest large-scale military movement in medieval English history. On the morning of September 25th, Harald Hardrada's scouts brought disturbing news. A massive English army was approaching, fast. Harold was caught completely unprepared. His army was divided. A significant portion of his force, perhaps a third, had been left at the ships, 12 miles away at recall. The men with him at Stamford Bridge had left their armor behind. It was a warm day. They weren't expecting a fight. The most experienced commander in Europe had been surprised by an army of 10,000 men. Well, what happened next reveals both Harold's genius and his doom. The English approached from the west. Between them and the Viking position was the river Derwent, crossed by a narrow wooden bridge. Harold had a choice: retreat to his ships and fight with his full force tomorrow, or hold the bridge and fight now with half his army in their tunics. He chose to fight. It was a gambler's decision. But Harold had been gambling his whole life, and he had always won. The bridge became the fulcrum of everything. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a single Viking warrior held the bridge alone against the entire English army. He reportedly killed 40 men before someone floated beneath the bridge in a barrel and speared him from below. Whether this story is literally true or legendary embellishment, and it bought Harold time, perhaps an hour, to form his men into a defensive shield wall on the eastern bank. But time wasn't his problem. Armor was. When the English finally crossed, they faced Viking warriors who had proven themselves in a dozen campaigns. But those warriors were fighting without chainmail, without helmets, many without shields, against an English army that had marched 200 miles in full battle gear, their rage building with every step. The battle lasted hours. The sagas describe it as one of the bloodiest engagements of the era. The Vikings fought with the desperation of men who knew retreat meant death. The ships were too far, the enemy too close. And then Harold made his final mistake. According to Norse sources, Harold led a charge against the English line. He fought with both hands, wielding his sword in a berserker fury, and an arrow found his throat. The most experienced warrior in Europe died because he exposed himself in battle. He died like a young man, not a king. He died because after 50 years of surviving everything, he had stopped believing he could die at all. When Harold fell, Viking morale shattered. Reinforcements arrived from the ships, but too late, too tired from running 12 miles in armor. The English cut them down. By sunset, the Viking army was destroyed. Of the 300 ships that sailed to England, only 24 carried survivors home. If you're finding this story as gripping as I do, consider hitting like and tell me in the comments. At what point do you think Harold's fate was sealed? So why did Vikings lose at Stamford Bridge? History offers several answers, each true, none complete. The tactical answer: Harold divided his forces and was caught without armor. Basic mistakes from a commander who should have known better. The intelligence answer: Harold underestimated English mobility. He operated on assumptions from previous campaigns that medieval armies were slow, that surprise required weeks of preparation. Harold Godwinson shattered those assumptions. The strategic answer: Harold's pause after Fulford was fatal. 4 days of rest gave Harold 4 days to march. Had Harold moved south immediately, he might have caught the English scattered, unprepared. But there's a deeper answer, one that speaks to something beyond tactics. Harald Hardrada lost because he was fighting the last war. For 300 years, Viking success followed a pattern. Strike fast, exploit local divisions, overwhelm with ferocity before organized resistance could form. This strategy conquered England in 865, founded Normandy in 911, ruled the North Sea for generations. By 1066, that era was ending. English kingdoms had unified. Communication networks had improved. Harold Godwinson could rally a national army and move it faster than any Viking commander expected. The world had changed. Harold hadn't. He still fought like it was the 9th century, relying on reputation, on surprise, on the assumption that his enemies would react slowly and fearfully. He was the best commander of an age that had already passed. There's a particular tragedy in this. Harold's experience, the very thing that should have ensured victory, became his blindfold. He had succeeded so many times that he couldn't imagine failure. He trusted patterns that no longer applied. The Vikings didn't lose Stamford Bridge because they were weak. They lost because they were facing an opponent who had learned from 3 centuries of Viking raids and finally figured out how to beat them. The aftermath of Stamford Bridge unfolded with brutal irony. Harold Godwinson had just won the most decisive victory against Vikings in English history. His army was exhausted, wounded, depleted. And 3 days later, he learned that William of Normandy had landed in the south. The English force marched again, this time south. 19 days after Stamford Bridge, Harold faced William at Hastings. He lost. An arrow, like the one that killed Harold, found Harold's eye. England fell to the Normans. The date matters. If Harald Hardrada had delayed his invasion by 2 weeks, William might have landed first. Harold would have fought Normans at Hastings, then faced Vikings in the north. The exhaustion would have been William's, not Harold's. The entire history of England might have pivoted on Harold's timing. Instead, Harold's ambition weakened England just enough for William to conquer it. But here's the strangest part of this story. William the Conqueror was himself descended from Vikings. His great-great-great-grandfather was Rollo, a Norse chieftain who seized Normandy in 911. The Normans were, genetically and culturally, Scandinavians who had adopted French language and cavalry tactics. So in a sense, the Vikings didn't lose England at Stamford Bridge. They lost it to other Vikings. Vikings who had evolved, adapted, become something new. And the Norse who stayed home, who kept raiding in longships, who fought on foot in shield walls. They were defeated by their own cousins who had learned new ways of war. Stamford Bridge wasn't the end of Norse influence. It was the end of a particular kind of Norse power. The age of the raider was over. The age of the kingdom had begun. 1,000 years later, Harald Hardrada still fascinates us. Not despite his failure, because of it. He represents something universal. The master who cannot adapt. The expert so certain of his methods that he cannot see when those methods no longer apply. The warrior who survives everything except his own assumptions. We encounter versions of Harold everywhere. In business, in technology, in politics. The industry titan who misses the next revolution. The champion who cannot accept new competitors. The empire that collapses under the weight of its own success. Harold's grave has never been found. Some accounts say his body was taken back to Norway, buried in Trondheim. Others suggest he lies somewhere in Yorkshire, beneath English soil he sought to conquer. Perhaps it doesn't matter. His real monument is the lesson his failure teaches. Experience is invaluable. But experience can also blind us. The patterns that brought past success may not apply to future challenges. The world changes. The question is whether we change with it. On that September afternoon in 1066, a bridge in northern England became the dividing line between one era and the next. On one side, 3 centuries of Viking dominance. On the other, the world that came after. Harald Hardrada stood on that bridge as the last representative of an age that was already dying. He just didn't know it yet. Perhaps none of us ever do. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell. I'm working on a deep dive into Harold's earlier life in Constantinople, where he served emperors and fought battles most history books never mention. Until next time.